Good evening and welcome to Two Views, a Tomorrow's Podiatry Facebook Live, where antagonistic cooperation is actively encouraged. Tonight, I've been joined by our two fantastic team hosts and leads, Liam McManus and Zoe Wilson. Good evening, everybody.
Yeah, evening.
Hello, nice to see you.
Lovely to see you too. As some of you may have noticed, I am not Nancy. I'm afraid she's had to take the night off, so you have my ugly mug instead. But tonight we have a fantastic subject. But since we've last seen you, you've both been busy, haven't you? Zoe, I hear you were over in your first international speaking. How did it go?
Oh, it was fantastic. I was joined by Emma Cowley, Emma White, and Belinda Longhurst and James Welch. And yeah, we had an amazing time, and it was lovely to represent podiatry over in on Canadian soil. So yeah, fantastic event, and really excited on this subject matter this evening.
You had a nice holiday though, didn't you, as well?
Yeah. Balance. Got to get the balance.
It wouldn't be right, Zoe, if you didn't have a nice holiday. For those that follow ZW Clinics, you will just see the fabulous locations that Zoe is often going to. And if you don't have yet, do either check out Southwest Podiatry or ZW Clinics to see Liam and Zoe's fantastic content. Liam, I understand you've also had a successful couple of months, and congratulations on your election onto council.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to getting stuck in really and making a bit of an impact at the Royal College of Podiatry for our members. Fantastic.
Well, we're here today for what I'm hoping will be a fantastic show and a subject matter that I think all of us have been waiting to see. For those of you that haven't joined us before, the format is simple. We take a subject and we give Zoe and Liam a side. They have to find two experts to come and represent. They then give us a 10-minute presentation on why their side is the best. And then we give it over to Zoe and Liam to try and pull apart the other side's arguments. But it's not the same without having your involvement there as well. So if you've got a question or you've got a way that you want to put to either Zoe, Liam, or our fantastic guests, do pop them in the comments. We'll be keeping an eye on them and putting them to our speakers later on. But without any further ado, Liam, tonight's subject is gait analysis 2D versus 3D. So do tell us, who have you managed to bag and bring in on your side?
Well, when 2D came up, I looked no further than this person, an absolute legend in the field of podiatry and podiatric MSK. This person qualified in 1995, working for the first 10 years being a generalist podiatrist and then heading a team within the NHS as an MSK lead. She started lecturing at the Staffordshire University before moving to the University of Plymouth in 2003 to take up a role as a clinical academic. She has a strong interest, obviously, within MSK, gaining an MSc in clinical podiatric biomechanics, before then following that with a PhD, specializing in the effects of prolonged running on the biomechanics and function of the foot and ankle. Dr. Emma Cowley, Emma White, is a well-known and well-published podiatrist. She is also actually a chartered scientist, which I didn't know, and sits on numerous advisory boards. She is the Dean of the Directorate of Podiatric Medicine for the Royal College of Pod, lectures within the UK and globally. She also joined yourself, Zoe, in Canada recently. I'm really excited to hear why 2D is so great from Emma, from my expert this evening. And I would like to welcome to the stage Dr. Emma Cowley.
Good evening, everybody. Oh, isn't it embarrassing when you hear yourself being talked about? So thank you.
No, Emma, it's fantastic to have you back. And having just discussed it, that you were with us again last week, and having been a friend of the stream, it's great to have you. So that's fantastic. And couldn't think of a better person to been bagged there, Liam. But Zoe, tell us, who have you managed to find for your side?
Sorry, I just had a message off said person. So a gentleman who needs no introduction and asked me not to give a huge introduction, but I'm going to give you a brief overview of this amazing expert who is the reason that I love MSK and the reason that, MSK podiatry is such a fascination of mine. So this person is one of the UK's leading podiatric surgeons specialising in sports injuries, biomechanics, foot surgery and orthoses. Throughout his impressive 30-year career, he has worked extensively with professional athletes in a wide range of sports, including rugby, football, athletics, cricket, badminton and hockey, and the list goes on. In addition to his clinical work, Mr. Trevor Pryor is a senior clinical lecturer in sports medicine at Queen Mary University in London and has lectured nationally and internationally. He regularly contributes to television and print media news items, as well as reviewing key medical journals. I'm extremely thrilled to introduce Mr. Trevor Pryor to this amazing webinar this evening.
Thank you very much, Zoe. I just sent her a message. I said, when she asked me the intro, I said, just say it's me and I work in London. And I sent her a message to say, oh, I might have left you in the lurch there a little bit after Emma's intro.
Well, that makes up our two teams for this evening. Looking forward to both your presentations and hearing the arguments on both sides. So we're going to kick off. We flipped a coin just before we started, and Liam won. And so, Emma, you're going to kick us off with the argument for 2D gait analysis. So I shall pass over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give myself a 10-minute timer because I don't want anyone telling me off. So, yeah, 2D. Well, the first thing to say is, the approach that I'm going to take probably will be a little bit different from Trevor's. As per my intro, I have got a clinical background of many years, but my focus more recently has been on research and education and policy formation around MSK, and that's caused me to ask some questions that I didn't necessarily ask as a clinician. So I hope that we can get a good conversation going, and as usual, Trevor and I will try and disagree, but we'll always be like, yeah. Anyway, so am I okay to click on from this? I am, aren't I? Good. Say is that I've just got a small declaration of interest to mention, which is that we have received a Run3D system at the University of Southampton, where I currently hold a post. It's my day job. We work with Run3D on some of their education side and that kind of thing, but no money has exchanged hands, and I just wanted to be honest about that before we get going. Okay, so back to the question in hand. Is 2D better than 3D? Well, guess what? No surprises. It depends. The first thing that I want to do is to say, what do we mean by 2D, and what do we mean even by clinical gait analysis? And then what is effective clinical gait analysis within that definition? So if we pause just for a moment and just take a step back, and just say, well, what do we mean by 2D gait analysis then? And when we talk about it, are we even talking about the same thing? Well, that brings me onto some work that's been before my time and since I've been sort of in this field as well. And Chris Kirtley and Paul Harradine, I'm drawing from their work. So Chris Kirtley, in his book, has kind of defined some of what it means to be in clinical gait analysis, and the types of clinical gait analysis that we might undertake within podiatry in particular. So as you can see here, we've got two columns. One of them is that, gait labs and some podiatry clinics might be undertaking video examination, measurement of gait parameters, kinematic, kinetic parameters, electromyography, and so on, and getting numbers. And that would be quantitative gait analysis. And as you can see, part of that is video examination. So there is some element of quantitative gait analysis that forms 2D, the definition of 2D, if you like. Then in the other column, we've got, this is something that no gait labs will do, but most podiatry clinics most certainly will do, which is visually assessed gait analysis. And this is a sort of naked eye, real time, no computerized or recorded aids, anything like that. Just, walk up and down the corridor and we'll say what we see. So it's more qualitative, it's more descriptive. And that is by and large what most podiatrists, certainly in generalist practices that do maybe a bit of MSK, might undertake. So we've got a bit of confusion in the field already, because when we start talking about 2D, we're straight away talking about qualitative and quantitative. And I think there is something to be explored there. Maybe we'll do that a little bit later. So this is where I'm landing at the moment. First of all, it's important to define. Second of all, it's important to define within that the conditions of the clinical gait analysis. So we'll go back to that a bit later. So I'll keep you on a cliff edge. But before we just get to that, I think it's important to note the blooming obvious, the elephants in the room, which is that 2D is really easy to get done. So from a point of view of science, I can't help but arrive back at this because it is important to understand the power of what we're doing. The psychometric properties and the clinical utility of gait analysis and how we do that is important to even whether we do it or not. Not everyone's got instrumentation in their clinic, as we've just seen. Vast majority don't, and if they do, it'll be a video camera. And after that, the drop-off is quite significant regarding technology. So really what it comes down to as well is, if you have got the technology, do you use it and do you know how to use it? And so therefore, is it valid? Is it reliable? Is it repeatable? Is it responsive to change? What's its internal consistency? So the way that its construct is formed, all this scientific stuff. And honestly, we can get into quite a lot of scientific talk about that and confuse ourselves. And I'll talk about that a bit in a minute to sort of help it all make sense a bit. The clinical utility side is, I think, a bit more important. And this is the time taken to administer, the cost of doing it, so buying the kit and so on, the training and the specialism required to undertake it with instrumentation or without, and of course, the portability. And straight away, you can see the case being made for 2D because, you know, we've all got phones with videos on, we've got eyes in our head, it's highly portable, it's easy to do, it's sometimes reliable, and we'll see just exactly where that lies. So what is effective 2D clinical gait analysis then? Well, that comes down to what are you trying to achieve? You know, are you trying to get buy-in from the patient? Are you trying to understand muscle function? Are you trying to understand the segmental movements and accelerations? You know, in a research context, yeah, you're going to ask those big questions. In a clinical context, maybe you will, maybe you won't. It'll depend on the clinical decision being made, and often the stakes of that clinical decision. Is it going to result in surgery or a pair of orthoses? So your investment in clinical gait analysis is going to depend on the question. So just going back to Chris Kirtley then, you know, when we do clinical gait analysis, we've got to really think about what we're working with. And here's another variable. So the objective, you know, theoretical principles, the laws of gravity, that kind of thing, they don't change, they're a given. The next thing is, are we seeking to collect measurements as part of our data, or is qualitative descriptors enough? And that will come down to things like, you know, how bad is your pain? Is it really bad? Well, you can get a descriptor of pain, or you can get a number for pain. Whereas if you want to know about heel off timing, that's a number, and that might require some instrumentation. The last one we'll come on to in a little while. So again, coming back to how effective your clinical gait analysis is, it will depend a lot on the conditions of that gait analysis. So your workflow and protocols are important. And I don't think podiatrists do this well enough. This is inspired by some work done previously by Slade and colleagues relating to exercise prescription. And I've kind of converted it and adopted it, if you like, for gait analysis. We don't describe the location. We don't describe generally, you know, what was like the equipment that was used. We don't say what the qualifications and experience was of the person. And that is going to be really important. I'm going to just move on because of time. Furthermore, when you come to clerking around the gait analysis, do we honestly talk about the prior exercise that's been undertaken by the individual that day? Do we talk about the sleep that they've had and therefore their perception of pain within the gait analysis? I think it's just adding that whole context and dimension into the gait analysis that then answers the question, is it better? Is it more effective? So we know that the patient is clearly a variable, but also the podiatrist is a variable and the setup is a variable. If you can be more consistent with your workflow and your environment, the context of the gait analysis, and you understand your own experience and you're honest about it, and okay, sure, the limitations of your human visual system as well, then you've got a chance of understanding whether your real-time clinical gait analysis is exactly what you say it is. It's reliable, a useful clinical tool. And so this brings us on to the last thing, which is the subjective interpretation based on your hypotheses. If you're working with old paradigms and old information, you're going to draw old conclusions. So it's important that your underpinning knowledge is up to date. So it's going to require you, regardless of whether you're doing 3D with complex instrumentation or 2D with just recorded footage and some digitization software, it doesn't matter. If your knowledge is not good, you're not going to draw good conclusions. Furthermore, if you are not experienced or you are experienced, that may make a difference. This table is drawn from a book chapter that I wrote in Forensic Gait Analysis. And as you can see, I've just drawn from that table here to show the differences in some of the more reliable parameters of visual gait analysis. So if you are looking to, describe shortened stance phase, then if you are experienced, you're going to be quite good at that. But if you're inexperienced, you're not going to be good at describing that with visual gait analysis. There are other examples as well. This is enhanced further by the use of video. And again, this is just another table, just briefly to give you the idea that we're good at some things, regardless of experience. Other things require experience. Other things, you're rubbish whether you're experienced or not. So it's important that you understand your limitations as a podiatrist. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go fully through each of these tables, but you get the idea. So, well, then we have to answer the question, don't we? And in which case we need to ask ourselves, what question were we trying to answer with our gait analysis? And one of the things people try to focus on is, you know, risk factors for injury, especially in the running world. People want to know what's likely to get them injured. So it raises the question, are there any characteristics of gait that might be risk factors for injury? And can 2D gait analysis answer those questions? Can it define whether there are any risks? Okay, I'm just a little bit out of time, but I'm going to carry on because I'm right towards the end. So characteristics of plantar heel pain. Well, very quickly, you can see these all require instrumentation. I'll move on. Stage 2, tibialis posterior tendon dysfunction. Again, they do need to mostly have instrumented gait analysis. Then we come to Achilles, and now we've got lower cadence. You can see lower cadence with 2D. You can measure that quite easily. So arguably one of the characteristics that is a risk factor for Achilles tendinopathy, you can answer with 2D gait analysis. But honestly, risk factors, don't use 2D. If you want to know about pain, then yeah, use 2D, because your patient will be able to tell you something about that. So in summary, 2D clinical gait analysis, it's more accessible than 3D. It's good for experience building and getting you used to doing it and seeking clinical changes following your interventions. It's cheaper, it's quicker, it's more portable than 3D, and it will answer some clinical questions, but not all. And it does rely on certain parameters being in place, like your experience and being good with your workflow. It's a good introduction to instrumented clinical gait analysis, and it can be used to gather qualitative, non-movement related data as well. That building that theatre of practice is really important to patients, and they like to talk. So a few references, a scary cat, and I'll leave you to go on to Trevor. I think you're muted, Michael.
There you go. It's always the way when somebody hasn't put mute, and it's myself this time. Sorry about that. Well, Emma, thank you very much. A whistle-stop tour there. So much filled in, and I'm sure plenty of us will be zooming back after this to go and look at those tables a bit more zoomed in, see what we can geek out on them. So that's an introduction there from Team 2D. And with an overviewing cat still staring at me on my secondary screen there, Trevor, I'll pass over to you for your introduction on 3D and why 3D is the way to go. Oh, sorry, Trevor.
I'm muted. I'm muted myself, so you've muted me.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. There we go. And I've currently got your screen at the moment is the Chrome screen, Trevor. So if I can get you to just pop up the presentation.
So that's in present, yes?
Yeah. So you might have to stop sharing and then reshare using that present screen. These are the pleasures of our technologies. We've been quickly loading these up just before the show for everyone. So while Trevor does.
So how do I unshare then?
So if you just press, you can just press stop sharing on that screen. There should be just a little blue bit that says there. There you go. That's just done.
Share screen.
There we go. So whilst we are waiting for that to come up, reminder to anybody there, if you do have any questions, do please pop them in the comments. I know that I'm sure plenty of you have some there that you may want to be sharing. And at the end of this, we'll be choosing the winner by a vote on Facebook poll. So do stick around. That is this now up, Trevor. So I shall add it to the scene and pass over to you.
Great, thanks. Sorry about that. Okay, so my claim disclaimer is I am a director with Run 3D, which provides 3D gait analysis for clinics. So that's just to make that clear. So, okay. So if we go back to NIG's research back in '98, where they gave something like 5 different types of orthoses, all designed to do the same thing in terms of limiting pronation to 8 different people, they found that the response to those orthoses, both intra and inter subject, were just completely unpredictable. And so started the concept that you can't really change the kinematics with orthoses in terms of the foot and ankle. And Williams and all repeated this to an extent in 2003. They took runners that had medial tibial stress syndrome, didn't respond to standard orthoses, so they gave them inverted orthoses, which are a much more supportive device. And again, they found that in terms of foot and ankle, the kinematic response was unpredictable. But in their study, they reported that there was a more predictable response in terms of inversion moments around the ankle. Interesting, though, is although they said it was unpredictable in terms of the ankle, the kinematics, they did find that there were kinematic changes further up the chain. So we've kind of taken this on board at QM, and we've started to do a series of studies, and it's a slightly busy slide, but the summary of this is in a group of people that were provided with a standard preformed off-the-shelf insole, both as it stands and both heated up to customize to the individual. And guess what? The kinematic changes are unpredictable at the ankle, and so are the kinetic changes. You can't actually predict the kinetic changes. And why is this? Well, the way that a foot functions is because it does what it can do in terms of its underlying structural alignment and range of motion, but also what the rest of the body asks it to do. And if the rest of the body is asking it to do lots of different things, then that's where it becomes unpredictable. But it's wrong to say that there are no kinematic changes. It's just we can't predict where those kinematic changes are and how much they will be. So by way of example, this is a slightly busy report. This is what you get from the Run 3D. We're effectively looking at pelvis, hip, knee and ankle. We can look at a range of measures in the 3 body planes, and the system compares the individual to an uninjured control group. So this shaded area would be plus or minus 1 standard deviation. So we can look to see whether there's asymmetry within the individual and compared to the control group, and where there may be higher or lower measures. So this particular individual ran in the Nike 4%. You know, that's their first carbon fiber shoe. Absolutely loved it. Ranted and raved about it. The next model was the next percent. She didn't like it. She couldn't work out why. So we literally did the analysis with her, and the main findings were that when she wore the Nike Next Percent, because of the construct of that shoe, it made her asymmetrical at the pelvis and the hip in the frontal plane. So with a 3D, we can be very objective. We can compare an individual itself. We can always also compare to a control group. Now, I think it's fair to say a lot of people say, well, you know, everybody's individual. There isn't one particular way that someone should run. So how can you compare to a control group? But I think you kind of need some kind of baseline from which to start, but be flexible in how you interpret with the individual. So it's a particularly interesting case where we've got a runner on video. And do I use video analysis? Yes, probably not as much as I used to. Do I use clinical visual gait analysis? Yes, I just had a look at my clinic today. I saw 18 patients today, and of those, something like 14 would have had, and probably will have some kind of visual in the clinic analysis. So what can you see from this particular person? And I don't know how many people are used to looking at this kind of video. If you're really observant, you might see that there's a slight difference in the foot strike left to right. This is someone who's had right-sided problems throughout their career. Okay, we can look at what the hip does. Frontal plane, you can see, are we getting hip adduction on both sides? To what extent is that, right? We also talk about step width. Emma said you can measure that on video, or certainly do it. Do we have a narrow step width or even a crossover gait with this particular individual? One might argue that. So there's a whole range of factors we can do. If you were really smart, you might see a little bit of asymmetrical arm swing. So what about objectively? Okay, well, we can measure our cadence. That's pretty easy. Anybody can do that. Step length, well, we can look and say with the step length, you can get an idea about the angle of the tibia in relationship to the ground. But what we can see with both of these, even though she's got a slightly asymmetrical foot strike, so more of a flat foot and a heel strike, we can be objective that she definitely has a long step length over stride. We can also get an indication, even if we didn't look at the video, that there may be a different foot strike pattern because the angle of ankle dorsiflexion of foot strike is asymmetrical. We can look at pelvic rotation. The reason I measure that, at one point I never considered this much, but what I've been observing is people that have an asymmetrical pelvic rotation at foot strike often have an asymmetrical arm swing, which may be driving gait. And what's really interesting is that a nice little study in 2017 showed that one of the ways you can maintain step length is to rotate your pelvis, and that happens to be more so in ladies than men. And if you go back to, if you think this is the right, has got an excessive pelvic rotation, and she had more of a midfoot strike, well, it's quite hard to get a long step length with a midfoot strike. So she's obviously using her pelvis to do that. We can look at hip adduction. Well, we can measure that. So I've taken the actual values off here. So we can see there's a bit of a difference there. I have to be honest with you, once upon a time, would I have said it's excessive? I might say that's a bit asymmetrical. But I can see very clearly that it's asymmetrical, and one is outside of one standard deviation for high and the other outside of one standard deviation for low. What about our foot strike position? Was there a crossover gait? Well, we do measure step width, and you can see that falls within the plus or minus one standard deviation. Why is that? Because actually the point of contact is the forefoot. And by the time the heel loads, it looks like she's got a narrow step width, but actually she doesn't. And I'll show you in another slide. The reason for being that is the hip adduction takes her back over the foot. We can look at the range of ease version. This is your classic, what do they look at in the shoes? In shoe shops, this angle that the shoe makes to the ground and to the leg. We kind of know that that's really a bit erroneous, because what the foot's doing inside that shoe is probably somewhat different to what the shoe's doing itself. But we can have a little look at that, and we can see quite clearly that that degree of shoe eversion is well within our normal range. And one of our joys here is we can actually measure tibial rotation. You cannot measure any rotation on video. Okay, so we now know with the tibial rotation, even if we thought that that was high, that the tibial rotation is low. So let's make an assumption. We've got a shoe that deforms too much, yet they've got low tibial rotation. I can almost guarantee you, if you put that patient into a stability shoe, that tibial rotation will reduce further, so you're not necessarily helping them. So let's now let's take it back to that shoe. We've already said that's within normal range, but how many people may have considered giving this particular individual stability shoe, given that there's more collapse on the right side, and we can see a bit of hip adduction, and it's all right-sided problems. Well, we've got another gait analysis. Let's have a little look at what happens inside the shoe, and guess what? Her heel doesn't even contact the ground. So that video suggests that the heel's on the ground, the shoe's collapsed, and it may need some support, whereas in fact, the heel's not even contacting the ground. So basically what happens is she steps out a long step, gets a forefoot strike, lowers the heel, doesn't contact the ground, gets no stability, can't control the right-sided pelvis. So I'm a bit of a Blondie fan. Does it have to be one way or the other? Right? Does it have to be one evaluation or the other? I don't think so. Why don't we kind of think of it a bit like radiology? So our basic radiology would be a nice X-ray. Well, in clinic, we can do quite a nice little visual analysis. As I said, probably 70% of the patients I saw today would have some kind of clinical evaluation. And you can have video analysis, maybe on a treadmill in your clinic. If you don't have it, well, how many people have an X-ray in their clinic? Some people do. A lot of people refer for it. Why do we not think about referring for gait analysis? It kind of always amazes me that. Our ultrasound, I kind of liken that to pressure analysis. And in clinic, that's a quick and easy way to do it is with a pressure mat. That you can pick these up for a relatively low cost. They're very easy to use, and you can quickly see whether or not someone's foot's loading the way you'd expect it to from their structure. We use the in-shoe pressure analysis system. They are quite a bit more expensive. They're a little bit more specialist, and maybe that's something that you could refer to. And our MRI, well, again, it can be in clinic, but there are a number of services that provide 3D gait analysis. And I kind of, to my mind, that when you're looking at the more complex patients and the patients that aren't responding and conditions that there's a big kinematic component to it, why wouldn't you want to be as objective as possible? What is our reluctance to refer? Well, is it a fear of the technology, or is it just a lack of understanding? Right? I mean, I kind of, we'll be relatively quick to refer for radiology, but not for gait. And I wonder why that is. That's pretty interesting. And just so I do finish on time, we can discuss the cases that might be considered for referral. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed there, Trevor. Again, an in-step and really nice to see you working through a case. I think that helps give us an idea of where some of the pitfalls and when some of the advantages may be. Liam, I can see you've already set up and put together your counter argument. So without any further ado, I shall pop over to give us a little bit of why you think Trevor might be just going a little step too far.
No, thank you, Michael. Yep, perfect. You've got my presentation up. Trevor, you mentioned do you have to be one way or the other? For tonight, we do. So we want listeners to be one way or the other. So whether that's 2D or 3D. But I absolutely agree with you. This is my clinic over in Southwest London. The disclaimer here is the fact that I have run 3D. I'm not a director like yourself or anything like that. We have a Run 3D suite upstairs, but in this room, we haven't got Run 3D. We've got a visual gait analysis room with just a simple treadmill, a little bit of a footstool there, and a camera which you can use your phone. So without further ado, and thank you very much, guys, for your presentations. I thought they were fabulous and well evidenced and researched. And I'm going to take you away from evidence and research, and we're going to look at the practical elements of 3D, and we're going to scrutinize 3D. So hopefully get some voters voting 2D. So today we're literally looking to explore what happens in clinical practice. So really the limitations of 3D, even though I love it, I agree, or the drawbacks of having 3D gait analysis within a clinic. And the first one I'm going to kind of get to here is cost. And what I've put together for any business owners here, these are just projections. These are not facts, but these are there or thereabouts. Please contact Can I Run 3D if you want any further information, for example. But these are just a 3-year cost projection. And there's multiple things I wanted to bring into today's talk. First of all, on the graph here, a treadmill. Well, actually for 2D, you don't necessarily need a treadmill. And that can bias things when it comes to the environment that you put somebody on a treadmill, so like the elderly, for example. But actually, if you have a treadmill, well, a reasonable treadmill is about £900. To service and repair that treadmill, it's about £500 for the 3-year period. And CPD, really, really important here. Obviously, it's important to invest in yourself as podiatrists or clinicians. It's important to take yourself out of clinical practice, to spend some time on courses, talks like this one, certainly CPD. And, I valued that probably about £2,000 for a 3-year period. Gait analysis software. Well, you can get some free gait analysis software for your mobile phone. You could also take, if you're lucky enough to an iPhone or an iPad, you could also slow that down as well. And that's obviously free as a video. But if you do invest in something like Dartfish or I think it's Huddle, it's around about £7 or £17 every month as a subscription, around about £252 for a 3-year period. Or Dartfish, for example. And then the alternative to this is obviously to have something like Run 3D, which might cost you in the region of about £36,000 over a 3-year period. There or thereabouts, guys. I don't have specific figures for you. So on the next slide, you'll see the cost comparison. So 3D, if we take those costs and break it down every month, you're looking about a £1,094 per month investment, which, by the way, we have invested and it's fantastic. However, in order to compare that to 2D, around about £101 per month for the bells and whistles. So that's a camera, some software, a treadmill, all the bells and whistles really that you need to basically, and a stopwatch as well, so that we can look at cadence, all the bells and whistles. So that's your kind of cost comparison for 2D and 3D. Obviously, multiple users would need additional CPD, so you might obviously want to have a look at allocating a budget for that. I've allocated a budget here of £2,000 investment in yourself, but at Southwest Podiatry of Earlsfield, we have 6 or 7 clinicians. You might want to allocate budget for that. Let's have a little look at some other variables. Well, it's really time consuming. So I'm going to talk to you about the patient journey of somebody undergoing 3D gait analysis. So during your initial consultation, that's about half an hour. And then they get booked in our clinic for an advanced MSK and 3D gait analysis. It takes about 2 hours. But for the first half an hour of that appointment, you're kind of putting markers on people. 3D gait analysis system has been systemized in a sense that it's actually a lot easier now and repeatable. But you've still got to mark the medial and lateral malleolus. You've still got to mark the knee. You've still got to put the 3 dots that you can see here on the screen around the correct anatomical location around the posterior pelvis. So there's a lot of time that you've got to do in order to even get calibration, first of all. And then during this 2-hour appointment, we're not actually telling the patient anything. So it's fabulous sending for this MRI of the way you walk, but actually they then need to come back for an appointment. So it's very time consuming. Next is it can be intrusive for people. So putting markers on people can be uncomfortable for people. So we've really got to think about that. We've got to think about if this is your only method of data capture, 3D gait analysis, then potentially children are not suitable. The elderly are not suitable if they have any stability issues. We're going to think about safety checks as well. So are people able to actually get on a treadmill and safely exit that treadmill as well? Limited access is unfortunately something that I have to consider as a clinic owner. We have it in one room. So we have a gait analysis suite, but it does limit access, doesn't it? If you only got it in one room, then only one podiatrist on that one day, but you could split it up into 2 days, for example, can use it at any given time. And actually for the time that you need to allocate, which is a 2-hour appointment, you can only really see 3 or 4 people in a day, unlike Trevor, who sees 18 in a day. I don't know how you cope. A lab environment as well. There's pressure for people to perform as well. So you've got to put them on a treadmill, you've got to walk or run them, and you're looking really in a linear fashion just to either walk or run. The environment considerations that you want to consider are footwear. So we have different types of footwear, right? So we're reviewing somebody using 3D gait analysis with footwear, not without footwear, so not barefoot. So that's obviously a consideration. Footwear can range from your Vivo shoes to minimalist to your maximalist and Hokas. So it obviously you've really got to consider that when you look at your data. The terrain as well. If you've got a runner in here and they're a cross-country runner, for example, they're not on a treadmill running. Coordination. Does 3D gait analysis actually replicate what happens in reality in the real world? Interpretation. You have to be really keen to be part of the 3D gait analysis world. And like I say, I found it absolutely fascinating. On the left-hand side here, you've got these nice kind of traffic light variables here, I suppose. So we've got a traffic light situation where the anterior pelvic tilt here is below, left is ideal, right is ideal, and above. This is perfect. So you can interpret that easily, and it's the pictures are well graphicked. But actually what you need to understand is all this data as well. All this data is pulled into some really nice graphs as well that Trevor showed you. But actually, the more you do this, the more you find that that you need to understand a little bit more, and the more time you need to spend on this. So it's whether actually the intention of having 3D gait analysis satisfies your needs or your requirements. Some of the parameters up here, cadence, for example. Well, actually, from a 2D perspective, you can run somebody, have a time, have a stopwatch. You can press your stopwatch within 60 seconds. You can actually count the amount of steps that a runner has. So there are obviously other advantages to 2D other than 3D. The limited dynamic analysis. So we're assessing people in a linear way, really, aren't we? Kind of moving forward. There are some limitations here. Ballet dancers, tennis players. So, from a UFC player, how do you analyze this UFC position? Somebody smashing another person's face on a 3D gait analysis system. Well, you can't. So we really have to look at the other limiting factors. And lastly, I really think that, does 3D really beat your eyeballs? Well, it's not up to us to decide. It's up to you. So instead of having a nasty cat in front of you, you've got my mug in front of your face. Thank you. He's on mute again, Michael. You've got to stare at my eyeballs for a little bit longer.
Oh, there you go. I was going to say, yeah. Thank you very much, Liam. There, an image I'm sure will all haunt us tonight in our sleep. But fantastic to have to look there to counter. And Zoe, I'm sure you've got all those points and more to put back on in the other way. So I shall hand over to you for your summing up of the 3D side of things.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for amazing presentations from Emma, Trevor, and Liam on some really fascinating points in clinical practice. And I think what I'm going to do is pick up on some of those points and talk about 2D analysis. So essentially 2D analysis, it's simple and it is repeatable to some extent, and it does take less time. And obviously the cost, as we can see from Liam's presentation, is extremely different across both aspects. But what I will say is that if we're accepting of the journey of implementing 3D analysis, what we can say is that, yes, the learning curve is steep, but it's extremely rewarding in terms of managing patient expectation and looking at how our management protocols have progressed, and also progression through rehabilitation and the likeliness of how orthotic therapy has affected the more proximal structures. And that's certainly what I tend to see in clinical practice. It also allows us to delineate who needs 3D analysis and who needs 2D analysis. And ultimately, personally, I use both of those things in practice. And I think we've always got to talk about the limitations of each of those aspects. For me, implementing Run 3D, and that is my disclaimer that I also use Run 3D in clinical practice, certainly on a weekly basis. And, you know, in terms of the patients that I see, a lot of them have been to lots of different clinicians in lots of different settings, but they've never been able to access 3-dimensional data. So we know that in terms of the functions of the human body and in human movement, it acts through triplanar motion. And we know that clues in the name 3-dimensional looks at both, well, all three of sagittal, transverse, and frontal. And what's really interesting is when we look at data like we can pull from a Run 3D system, what we can see is those 3 planes of motion acting at different times throughout the gait cycle. We can compare objective data of that patient. We can also compare that data to the large database that has accumulated, for example, within Run 3D. And I think ultimately, when we're looking at the 2 dimensions of how we assess gait, what we can say in terms of 3-dimensional gait is that it allows us to objectively monitor treatment interventions and how existing interventions have affected the patient and their outcomes. I think what's interesting, and hopefully we'll have time to discuss this, is how footwear also is a factor when looking at those dimensions as well. What I will say from a personal perspective of implementing 3D, and I'm sure Liam will agree, is that I have a range of different clinicians in the clinical setting using Run 3D, and also physiotherapy. It opens up opportunity for referral pathways. Also, patients are able, with health insurance, we've got infrared 3-dimensional gait analysis, which is a part of that. And, you know, it is complicated, and I do feel that there is a time element to it. But ultimately, with a lot of patients, once you become efficient in utilizing the technology in clinical practice, you do become faster at recognizing which of those parameters are relevant to your patient and which of them you're going to change. I also want to comment on gait retraining and how that can be assessed in clinical practice. And yes, you are restricted to a treadmill, and I'm interested in how we are able to use this data across different disciplines in terms of sport, and it is a linear examination. But surely with more information and appropriate understanding of that information, we're able to collate better outcomes for patients and also monitor their progression in a more objective manner. And I do feel that ultimately 3-dimensional gait in laboratory settings, the Run 3D system isn't collating all of that information. It's picking, or the way that it's been designed is it's using information that would be beneficial to us in clinical practice. And I certainly feel that with advances in pressure analysis and combining those two, which I know Trevor does on a daily basis as well, we're truly getting a full appreciation of that movement MRI of the patient, as we've spoken about. So I suppose we know that 3-dimensional gait as an industry standard is the gold standard. And so my question to you is, how can we again argue with the gold standard. And I do feel that companies like Run3D have allowed us to bring that laboratory setting to some extent into our clinical practice, which I think is amazing for patients and amazing for our profession moving forwards. And I think that's me.
Zoe, thank you very much. I think we've seen both an evidence-based background. We've seen a fantastic versus analysis and a breakdown. We've seen a cost-benefit analysis, plus, as I say, a picture that's still haunting me in the bottom here, and then an overview there of how it's been put into practical. I'm going to start off, and especially as this is a student-based show, but a reminder, anybody out there who is watching, please do put your questions in the chat. Sarah Jane, lovely to see you. As always, and I'll come to your question in a moment. But Emma, you mentioned at the beginning there that Southampton has been gifted a 3D analysis and I guess does 2D analysis as well. How have you found that's changed the way that students interact with their understanding of the concepts of gait analysis as they're learning it?
I'm so glad you asked me that question, because the way that we're using it mostly at Southampton is with our pre-registration physio master's students who are doing quite big project dissertations. And that's where we're sort of using it mostly to sort of engage students. But we do have an awareness session with our undergraduates as well in podiatry. And what we discover during that awareness session, the reason that we keep it at that level is because in podiatry versus physiotherapy, the education preparation for gait analysis is very different. So in physiotherapy, they are immediately geared towards MSK and neuro MSK as well. So they are looking for compensatory mechanisms in stroke, and they are immediately brought into mind of lever dysfunction in cerebral palsy. In podiatry, we just don't have those conversations in the same way. We're much more foot-centric. We're much more mechanically paradigmed as well, as opposed to neurologically paradigmed. So our focus is somewhat different. I feel for podiatrists, having worked in education for 25 years, clinic for 30 odd years, and in research, to understand the journey that I've been on as well as a clinician, coming from exactly that same preparation. Don't forget that every pod starts out at that. My return to 2D having been through, so we used CodeMotion in my PhD. I used CodeMotion, which is very similar to Vicon, which is what the hardware behind Run3D. And that journey of education blew my mind. It blew my mind. It started me thinking about, during my research, it started me thinking about protocols, about repeatability, about what the power of the instrument is at 3 meters versus 2.5 meters away from the cameras. It started me thinking about interpretation. We had case, so when I was using it clinically as well, the CodeMotion system, we were working with perioperative children with cerebral palsy. They were sometimes, 7 or 8 years old and about to have multi-level surgery, literally their whole posterior chain being sectioned. And all of a sudden, it brought home to me the reason why I needed that information. It was a high stakes information situation. We needed every piece we could get. We used, video, we used the 3D, but every case session that I came out of, and I was, like I say, pretty experienced and advanced by this stage. And we'd been in with the orthopods, with the orthotists, with the parents, the child, you name it, the physio, everyone was in that room. The learning journey I had been on during that period was absolutely mind-blowing. If I was to expose an undergraduate to that in anything other than an awareness with podiatry preparation, where they've been focusing a lot on diabetic wound care and all of that, physios can't do that, by the way. That's what pods are really good at. It would, I feel, alienate them. So for me, 3D is something that we start the journey off. We absolutely should start the journey off in undergraduate training, but be very careful about overwhelming, because pods don't like MSK at the best of times, according to all of the surveys I've ever done. And they are underconfident, largely feel and sometimes are undercompetent. So to put them and land them in a 3D situation is just going to scare them. So we need to take them on that journey. And I think the exposure of the way we do that at Southampton, that's the rationale behind it. And if they want to come back and do PhDs and MScs, absolutely bring it on. Then we start that learning journey in the next phase with them.
Fantastic rationale. And I suspect something there that we can really apply to a lot of early stage graduates and actually some of those that are a little bit later down their podiatry journey as well, in terms of how we look at these things. I know we're very lucky on these shows that we often get those well versed in the MSK world and where this is really the next step in it, but it's not forgetting those primary principles first of all before we, without wanting to put a foot pun in there, but let's learn to walk before we can run. Trevor, I suspect this one might have been slightly set up for us from Zoe here, but in your presentation, you did a fantastic job there of picking up the difference that footwear can make and how 3D analysis allows us to assess that. How useful have you found that in practice? Is that something you've increasingly seen in 3D that you maybe wouldn't have noticed as much in 2D? Oh, so I'm just going to unmute you, Trevor, sorry.
Then I thought it was me you saying I had the background noise. You said something. Look, if I could just go back I first set up video analysis in the early 90s where you didn't have any phones or anything. I had 4 security cameras, a quad splitter, and a VCR that did frame analysis. And, obviously and I had all 4 angles and, got loads of information from it. And it was about the mid-90s, I went out and spent some time with Dannenberg because he was using in-shoe pressure analysis to design orthotics. And I thought, oh, that's just so much better than I'm doing. I have to have a bit of that. So I got hold of the PDAR. And what the PDAR shocked me with really was that when I looked at a foot on video and thought, yeah, it's pronating, it's doing X, Y, and Z, I then looked at the pressure pattern and it was doing something completely different. And that was the first thing that switched me on to how outside of the foot may be affecting the way that the foot functioned. And I'd have people, I thought, yeah, I can do that with this orthotic. It didn't matter what I did with the orthotic, it made no difference to that individual's loading pattern. So we practiced for a whole period of time and we'd use the pressure analysis to say, okay, well, we can see what you're doing. Let's see how your foot actually loads and whether or not we think it's coming from outside the foot or inside the foot. Right? And then if I thought it was outside, I'd refer them on for an opinion, but no one ever told me anything. Right? I didn't know what was going on. And when I first saw the 3D stuff, it wasn't in this country, it was actually in Canada. I thought, oh my God, the missing picture. That looks absolutely fantastic. And just like orthoses, you can't predict where the kinematic response is. It's exactly the same with footwear. You cannot predict where the kinematic response is going to act. I showed you the 2 differences between those Nike shoes that are ostensibly just a similar shoe, but got completely different geometry. Liam mentioned about whether it's a Vibram shoe, whether it's a Hoka, all the different things and how they interact. I'll go as far to say is that the more difference, I'll reverse that. When someone's got good strength, flexibility, control of the lower limb, the difference that orthoses and footwear make is far fewer. When you start sticking stuff in and it makes big differences all over. I saw a patient today, we ran her in a Saucony Ride, which is a neutral shoe, and a Saucony Hurricane that has some stability. She had her own orthoses, which were Pro 2 orthoses, right? And we also tried her in VHD, the Vasily Dannenbergs, right? And each instance we did gave her a different set of responses, right? Now, she happens to have right hip pain, and we could demonstrate how the different responses would affect her right hip, right? And we will regularly try people with different types of shoes. We see certain responses with the Hokas. And just like you can't predict what an orthotic is, you can't predict what a shoe's going to do, right? So I'm not saying that for everybody wants advice on a running shoe, they have to go off and have a 3D gait analysis, right? Because you can start at certain points. But for your patients that have had recurrent injuries, for your patients that are not responding, for the patients that, you've rehabbed that and now they get a problem somewhere else, right? There is 100%, I would not be able to do my level of practice without it now. Right. Similarly, I use the pressure analysis. Completely get what Emma's saying is that 2D over 3D at undergraduate level. Yeah, I'll go as far to say is that I'm better at video analysis now that I've done 3D gait analysis. Right, but I'll look at someone and I'll say, I don't know whether that's excessive or not. I don't know whether that's symmetrical or not. I'm either believer. Right, well, I don't have to be either believer when I've got objective data. Right, so, and I know we have to stand and well, okay, if you said to me, I very rarely look at the videos now. Right, so I could quite happily practice without video analysis. I couldn't happily practice without 3D. There you are. I'm not sitting on the fence there, am I? You're on mute.
We'll get it right there. Sorry, I was trying to produce and at the same time. Apologies, I'm not used to doing both at the same time anymore. I mean, on that, I think a stringent side, it's great to see some debate going forwards. And in the chat here, some backwards and forwards happening as well. So Sarah Jane just coming up with point out 3D analysis not always done on a treadmill. In lab settings, it's not on a treadmill, so not always a variable. But let's face it, nothing in lab is ever going to be exactly the same as the setting in real life. And I think that links back to your comment there earlier. Picking up on that, Sarah Jane saying, do we need to think about how we structure the pod undergraduate debate? And I'm sure that's something that we can leave to you. I know Savio, thank you for your comment there as well, coming on saying, I wish I'd had 3D gait analysis at university. I think it would be a huge game changer for all students, especially with introducing and exposing students to complexities of gait analysis. Something I think that is often something that scares people initially when they're entering into that area. Richard Wilkins, thank you for your there, pointing out that there is now markerless systems for gait analysis. And I think you touched on it there, Trevor. You know, it was only 25, 30 years ago where we'd be dreaming of the ability to access some of these technologies, and to have them now at our fingertips and be affordable, never mind being able to be accessible in the clinical environment, is something that's just fantastic to see, be that 2D video analysis or 3D video analysis. I'm going to pass over to yourself, Liam, for a question to put to the team to see if you can strengthen or inadvertently weaken your case.
I might be weakening it here, actually. It's asking more of an interest around 3D gait analysis and just human movement in general. And it's actually picking up from Richard Wilkins. Hi, Richard. Studied with him back in the day over at Huddersfield Uni. So, Trevor, just a quick one for you. I went over to Podiatry actually a couple of months ago over in Spain and saw this huge gait analysis suite where they've got Vicon cameras all over a huge room, and they're able to actually analyze people jumping, squatting, moving, and not just kind of straight down the line. How far are we off bringing that technology from a real lab situation into a clinical practice like Southwest Podiatry, for example, and your clinic?
I think the only way you're really going to do that is with inertial sensors. I'm not sure. I think the markerless stuff is some ways off, and even with the inertial sensors, the problem you've got with those is that they have to make some assumptions. There are only so many channels they can.
Trevor, can I just jump back in there, because for some of those that aren't necessarily as closely into it, can you explain what an inertial sensor is compared to a marker, just very briefly? So I know that's probably a.
Oh, yeah, okay. So a marker is something you place somewhere on the body, and it's either picked up by an infrared camera or it's an electromagnetic or something. So it tracks an area of the body. Whereas inertial sensor is what you've got in your iPhone. So when it tells you, you know, when you move it around and you can measure your vibration or whatever, there's an inertial sensor in there. So it measures the kind of the direction of motion in 3 planes, and therefore you can use it to track body motion. I mean, actually, someone who's really interesting to talk about, no one I know him, is that guy's called Andy Franklin Miller, and he's a sports medicine doc, and he's kind of responsible for running a lot of the sports and gait stuff at the SSC Centre out in Dublin. And they have a couple of full-blown 8-camera Vicon labs, because they do a lot of work around athletic groin injury. And a lot of the research around there, it's very important to get cutting motion, right? So that you run in a certain direction, you cut left, you cut right, and you look at the different interactions. In fact, a lot of the data they've done has shown that actually there's often 2, 3, or 4 patterns that are common for injury as opposed to one pattern, you know. So his kind of concept, he thinks inertial sensors will be a big thing, but you need to have enough channels. And what you have to do is you have to get masses of data so that you can then do sort of modeling with it, so that the sensor doesn't have to be quite as accurate in terms of what it's measuring. And I suspect to do all the stuff, Liam, that you talk about, I mean, you could have force decks in your clinic at the moment that you'd be able to do a lot of that jump analysis, because that's what a lot of them use is the force decks for that. I think for the multi-direction stuff, I think we're probably you can do it, but you just don't have enough money to do it. You can't make it cost effective, right? And that's what it really boils down to is, can you make it? I when you showed that UFC thing, I want to say, well, it's a bit like saying I'm going to use a video to do a vascular assessment or something like that. Do you know, I was going to be really facetious, and it's like, okay, it's expensive and it's not very often, but then I'd never refer for an MRI. I have to tell you, I was on the meeting with Bupa when they discussed covering podiatry in 2010, and the reason, if you look at the Bupa codes, it says infrared video gait analysis, which is just like, oh really? It's either infrared or it's video, it's not both. And what they really wanted was that you were able to record your gait so that you could look back on it, right? And that's why they'll accept a webcam with using, I don't know, some kind of free app or whatever. And I sort of said to them, well, there are different types of things. I gave them the radiology analogy and for MRI. They said, well, the MRI machines, some cost $1 million, some cost $3 million. We only pay one price for an MRI. I said, yeah, but you pay a different price for ultrasound, you pay a different price for X-ray. Why are we only going to pay one price for gait? Of course, they're not interested in that, are they? They want to keep the cost down. But so I think in answer your question, I think we're a little ways off for all of that. I wonder if we actually do need all of that in terms of the multi-direction. I think you're becoming a much more specialist service. So, clearly I see a lot of high-level athletes and stuff like that, and they want as much objective data as well as they can. I think what's great is that you can, the patient I saw today with all the different shoes, she's a scientist, and does proper science. And she was fascinated by it, and there's a patient education bit in it as much as if Emma shows someone a video. People see a lot when they see a video, and you just kind of take them another little stage, really.
Perfect. Trevor, so thanks for that. Emma, just quick question back to our side here on 2D. But so is this needed then? If the technology that I've seen, obviously in Spain, and if we're going down the route of multi-directional, is it needed, or is actually is 2D more suitable for the types of patients that we're seeing in clinical practice?
So the question is, again, for what? And this is really where I was trying to gear my focus of my talk, because if you're asking a band 5 podiatrist, then possibly not. But if you're talking about advanced practice, and obviously we're moving a lot more into advanced practice now, where the questions get more complex, the patients get more complex, the big effect size test hasn't worked. You're now looking for smaller changes, or you're looking to measure different things. You'll notice that one of the things that we've all started to do in this conversation is assume that everybody just knows what pelvic obliquity is. And, we're all familiar with the temporal spatial parameters that we might want to measure. And we're forgetting where we've come from. The podiatry students who I've been training for 2 or nearly 3 decades, they don't know that stuff when they come through the door. We have to even introduce them to what that is and why it matters. And, and then we have to be mindful of, our bias as well. When we go looking at gait analysis, we come from a podiatric set of eyes and a podiatric mind with our podiatric reasoning, which is different from a physio. So if we're asking a question that a podiatrist reasoning will answer very well, then yeah, we need that, and we need all the information that's going to help answer that question. Complex question, complex information, get the kit out. But the thing that has been ringing in my ears all the way through this session is all the gear, no idea. Do not be fooled. Getting a, Run 3D is easy. They've made it really easy. You just, and other brands are available, but you might want to just get in there, click a button, get an output, even get a great graphic that the patient can see. They watch their little skeleton running along and they're like, oh, that's me. And it's impressive. It's good theatre. But all the gear and no idea gets you nowhere. In fact, it's dangerous. So you must engage with the CPD element of it. You have to have good knowledge to interpret what's going on. Otherwise, you're going to come to wrong conclusions, or worse, you just won't make conclusions at all. Or you might, come out with something that is just so far left field, it's not even worth saying. So you've given the impression of expertise to the patients, which is a bit deceptive, only to then not have the knowledge and the wisdom and the experience to back it up. And I think that's going to be a brand risk for us. So I think it's a slow journey. This is a slow incremental journey. We need role models. We need people like Trevor to, who are using it all day, every day with that years of industry wisdom and experience to show those decisive moments. Now's the time we need this. Now's the time we can draw this conclusion and walk less experienced and knowledgeable podiatrists through that journey and help them to get there themselves and spot their gaps in knowledge along the way. And that's the kinder way to do it, I think.
I think something that we can be guilty of across the profession there, of buying the shiny things without actually doing the necessary work behind it, and then being surprised when we're not always taken as seriously as we think we should be in that situation. Building on that, and when I've noticed we're coming up to the hour mark here, so I'm going to begin drawing us to a close in a moment there. I think it's been a fantastic debate. I'd like to thank both Trevor and Emma for taking the time to come along tonight and to give us the side of their wisdom today. As we're looking at the back there for you is when we're some of the chat they're talking about, and I think exactly that debate, Emma, that you've been touching upon there around it, is that we fall into this fallacy of knowledge when actually, as you say, when you're learning all these things amongst all the other bits on there, do we need to really look at how we coach and mentor our students to that point? And I'd be irresponsible of me whilst on here, Emma, not to point out the new graduate frameworks that are coming out there, which I know you've been highly engaged and a part of, and would recommend to anybody that's coming towards the end of their degrees or is in the early stages, or is somebody that is helping to mentor podiatrists down the line. It's certainly a piece of work that's worth checking out, and I think has been underutilized since its initial drafts. And I'm really excited to reread some of those bits going forwards. Question coming in from Sean Savage. Sean, thank you very much. Welcome to the room, and Emily as well. Great to see you both on here. Sean's asking, great if you've got all of this, but do you need to then another 2 hours afterwards to retest these beta tests of all these different options to see what works and what doesn't work?
Say that again.
Sorry, once you've done your 2 hours of your assessment and your initial checks, do you then need another 2 hours on it to then see how, when you put in your protocols and see how effective they've been, or is simply questioning the patient enough to be able to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it was a bit like the patient I saw today. I mean, I probably could have tested in about 15 different scenarios, and at some point there is an information overload, and you have to be realistic. And I mean, that would be where Emma would say that, the objective data you get has got to be combined with your clinical history taking and all the other stuff that goes around it. And sometimes you just got to say, okay, well, enough's enough. And I think really what the reality is, how many people do we reassess? We always talk to the patients about doing that. And I think really their motivation is whether or not they progress positively. And I think a lot of people, when they start to get a positive result, well, I mean, I should say there may be loads of people that have had a negative result, but they just haven't bothered to come back and tell me they've gone and seen someone else, because you never know that, do you? And the interesting thing, so just for the student's perspective, whenever you see someone and someone says, all I see is their bad results, right? Just bear in mind that they're only ever going to see the bad results, because the good ones aren't going to go and see them just to tell them they had a good result, right? So just remember that when people are being bad-mouthed. I think, ideally, Sean, if you could do, you'd be retesting, because as much as anything, you learn yourself from the outcomes of that. But the reality is there's always going to be a time and cost efficiency to patients as to how much time and money they're going to invest in it. And therefore, a lot of it will be around your review and how they're done. I mean, in terms of, you give someone a pair of orthotics, right? How well do you know they've worked other than they've told you they're comfortable? Right, what sort of testing is someone doing to check that the orthoses have worked properly, whatever that happens to be. What we tend to do is say, has it helped you with your pain or your problem, or do you feel more stable? And if they say yeah, we go, oh, for that, move on to the next patient.
So some wise words there, and I think especially as confirmation biases can sometimes hit home no matter where you practice. I'm going to draw us to a close. I think we could have this conversation ongoing forever, and I'm sure at some point, if anybody's got any further questions in your conference, do pop up and say hello and ask those questions. Well, we've got a quick question there, and I'm going to pass this one very briefly to you, Emma, because it's more just, and I just want, I can't pass up on a chance to to push the careers framework. So Savo, who's from over in Australia, but just asking where, for those people that are interested, can they find that careers framework?
Oh, thank you. That's really nice to hear that people want to engage with it. So the first iteration of the career framework, I believe, has just been taken down because we've just launched the second one. So the second one is currently with the Royal College of Podiatry being digitised. It will be on their website very soon. So it's with the comms team and the digital print team as we speak. Just a quick heads up about it, just because you can't actually drag it down off the internet yourself at the moment. It really is a framework, and it came through a stakeholder approach. So the profession has helped me to construct it. I was brought in as a consultant, but I was not the wisdom. The people from the profession helped me to do that. And basically, it's a way of you using it as a mirror. So you look at what you know now, where you're trying to get to, what are the requirements of that goal, and what you need to do to get there. And that's where you can plug in all the relevant capability and competency frameworks, so that you can achieve that. So it's a website near you soon, not there just yet, but keep looking.
Fantastic, thank you very much indeed, and you're too nice there. I know from the conversations we've had in the past how instrumental you've been, both to its initial inception right the way through to its redevelopment. So fantastic to see. Right, guys, this is it. Let's see who's won. I'm going to pop up a poll just now to see who's won your vote. What would you put into your clinic? I'm going to leave that up for just a moment. I'm going to do some housekeeping. For those of you that are aware, we have the Tomorrow's Podiatry Awards. They are coming up to the deadline for nomination. So if you know a student that deserves a little bit of recognition, we have the Student of the Year Award, undergraduate. That's open to anybody in a pre-registration course. So that can be apprentices, master students, or undergraduate students. We have the Research Student of the Year. That's open to all PhD students or master students in the UK doing a postgraduate course in podiatry. We have the student leader role. So if you know somebody that's really been pushing the boundaries and is a future leader in the profession, do go and check them out. All the details are there, and they are a fantastic way of recognizing our future talent. That's tomorrowspods.com/awards. We've also, this is our last show of the year, and I have to say a big thank you to all of our contributors. Over the last academic year, we've had 4 shows going round in rotation. We've had the Journal Club with Sarah Jane Walls and Sarah Connellan have been taking us through how to read a paper. And I know that can sometimes be a difficult and challenging thing. So fantastic. Thank you very much to you two. We've had the surgery show where we've had fantastic overviews on hallux limitus, looking at healthcare medicine, and also looking at imaging. And thank you to Nicola, Burt, and Claire for that. We've also had our 2 view strand where we've had Liam and Zoe pulling us through, as well as our absent host tonight, but always in charge, Zoe, Nancy Kelleher, who has kept us going on this side of things, and our fantastic guests. And also, most importantly, our student show, which has been taken by the Freya and Gaia Holmes, Sophie Bennett, and Lucy Beaumont, giving us an overview of student podiatry from around the country. So a big thank you to all of our contributors this year. This wouldn't be without you, and hopefully it's a resource. If you've missed those shows, do go and check out our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/tomorrowspods, and you can catch up on all those videos. They're a great resource. For those of anybody who's gone in on hallux limitus, I'd highly recommend Claire and Nicola's overview of that. It was a fantastic overview. Now, let's have a look and see who has been taking the lead. And the question we asked was, which do you think would be best for your clinic, 2D gait analysis or 3D gait analysis? And drum roll, please. Our winner is, with 56% of the vote, 2D analysis. Liam, you have taken a clean sweep this year. Congratulations. Yes. Congratulations.
Well done, Emma.
I'll pass you over for a victory speech there, Liam.
Oh, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the intros as well and the ending. Look, Zoe, it's been an absolute pleasure to get the experts on here, hasn't it? So look, thank you to Trevor, thank you to Emma,
yeah, absolutely,
and Michael in the background as well, who works tirelessly to set these up. So thank you as well, Michael.
Thank you very much, Liam. That is all from us this evening. If you do have any ideas for future shows, please do message us. We're always looking for things that we can put forward to and find the experts to answer your questions. In the meantime, have a lovely summer. Thank you to everybody that's been involved. Until next time, keep safe and keep thinking. Good night.